Hello and welcome to Masterclass number 31. My name's Morag Gamble, and the topic that we have to explore in this masterclass is all about the permaculture ethics. Thank you so much for being here today. It's a delight to have your company. I'd like to welcome all of those of you who are here as part of the Permaculture Educators Program, and I'd also like to welcome any of you who this is your first time of being here at the masterclass. So while the presentation's happening, feel free to open up the chat and start to be asking questions and exploring ideas together. So this presentation that you're about to see, I have actually just pre-recorded earlier today to make sure that my internet doesn't drop out at the wrong time. But I am here and I'm able, while you're listening and watching, to be able to answer your questions, engage in conversation. So go ahead and open up that chat and start doing that. And I also like to thank everyone who answered the survey as part of the registration and offered the fantastic ideas for future masterclasses, because these masterclasses essentially come from the topics that you suggest to me. But before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm meeting with you today, the Gubbi Gubbi people, and to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And the reason I've got this photo here is because a few days ago, I was out walking through the eco-village here and I came across some of the first bunya nuts of the season. So that's what these are. They come in 10 kilogram kind of pine cone looking things. It's from Araucaria bidwillii, which is this very magnificent native tree that's been around pretty much since the time of the dinosaurs. And this particular plant is an important food source in this area, and I'm really delighted to be part of a community that, through its focus on permaculture and caring for the earth and embracing all of the ethics, that we are now replanting a lot of these bunya nut trees that had been cleared in the past. So like all of the masterclasses in this series so far, they're brought to you by the Permaculture Education Institute. So this is the organisation through which I run the Permaculture Educators Program, which is essentially an online but very practical and connected global program where people can gain their design certificate and their teacher certificate. It's also brought to you, this masterclass, by Our Permaculture Life, and that's where I post all my blogs and YouTubes, the podcast, and also a more practical hands-on permaculture introduction course called The Incredible Edible Garden. It's also brought to you by the Ethos Foundation, which is the permaculture education charity that I run, and through this work we send lots of support to, particularly at the moment, people who are teaching permaculture to young people, to women, to local leaders in East Africa, and particularly the refugee settlements there. And also this program is brought to you through the Perma-Youth program as well. So many young people are connecting into all of the above and running their own programs too. So I'll let you know a little bit about those in a moment. But first of all, the topic for today is all around the permaculture ethics. So what are the permaculture ethics? So the word ethic actually stems from the Greek ethos, and really looking at what is the nature of things, what is the culture of it, or the character that defines a particular thing, or what are the customs that are embedded within that ethic or that ethos or that community. And so permaculture, it's essentially a thinking tool or a way to cultivate relationships, and the ethics are really central to this. Permaculture is an ecological way of being in the world and an ethical and holistic way of living that's essentially around regenerative design. How can we design our human systems in a way that supports us to have an ethical and holistic way of living, and that supports us to have this more ecological way of being in the world? And so the ethics of permaculture underpin all of that way of thinking and that way of being. And there's 3 core ethics, and the way that they're defined kind of varies from time to time, but the way that's kind of settled most that you'll see them is that it's earth care, people care, and fair share. And the 3 of these together are intertwined and interconnected. You can define them separately, but you'll always find elements of the others within them too. So in this session, I'd really like to unpack each of these ethics and explore what they mean separately, but then also what they mean together. Because I think very much so that the permaculture ethics are what defines permaculture and what we can consistently come back to every step along the way as we're learning permaculture. And even today, after decades of being involved in permaculture, I constantly come back to these. It's kind of, you could call it a mantra but basically it's just a core guide. Now, you'll see them expressed like this by people like David Holmgren. This is his core way of expressing the permaculture ethics, which are at the heart of what permaculture is, surrounded by the 12 core principles. And it's these together. So the ethics inform the principles and the principles inform the practice. And it's not like a recipe. It's more like a way of thinking and a way of being and a way of looking and perceiving and describing what we notice around us. Because everywhere you go, it looks different. Everywhere, every different culture or place or family will interpret them differently and apply them differently. So the permaculture ethics can be described as a framework for thinking regeneratively. It gives us the language to be able to express this. They're a guide for making decisions. So I often encourage people when they're designing a project or designing an education program or thinking about how they might create a permaculture livelihood to use the ethics as a guide. So for example, you can ask, so how is this project that I'm working on contributing to me being able to care for the earth? How is this project that I'm working on contributing to me to be able to care for people? And how is my project contributing to an equitable way of being? So I find too that permaculture ethics provide us with a shared language. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, when people are working with permaculture, it gives you this connective thread. The permaculture ethics also give suggestions on how to interact with one another. So looking at caring for people and mutual aid and cooperation and collaboration and creating healthy human habitats that are embracing the well-being of other species too, and designing and creating our own human habitats that are healthy for us but are contributing to the regeneration of the ecological systems for other species, and also helping to maintain, protect and regenerate planetary systems. And of course, it's about creating a life and a way of being that is healthy for you and that supports your sense of well-being, and so physically and emotionally, mentally, financially too. And so permaculture ethics can be at the core, and I find this so useful in the work that I do, that my work is based on the permaculture ethics, and so it gives me a sense that my work is connected with my ethics, which is connected with the community service work, and all of these things are interrelated. So this idea about the permaculture ethics underpinning what it is that is not just our way of life, but also our livelihoods. So let's just have a look at some of these ethics and just unpack them a little bit more. So earth care, essentially, it speaks for itself. It's pretty self-explanatory, this one. It's really about designing our human systems, our human settlements, in a way that they contribute to the protection of habitat. So instead of creating settlements and our homes that are actually destroying habitat for other species, we're looking at how we can protect it. And particularly with the amount of land clearing that's happening around the world right now, and even under our very noses, often around our own neighbourhoods, that this is an important priority because what exists, what is currently standing, really needs to be protected. And so our designs do that. And as we're also thinking about protecting, we're also thinking about repairing the damage that's been done so far, and looking at how what we're doing in our own local communities is able to contribute to the planetary project of us all in all of our different communities, working to restore the planetary systems on which we all survive and rely. And so a key part of this is regenerating the ecosystems. We've got ourselves into a situation where these are starting to fall apart. They're starting to fragment, and it doesn't matter which ecosystem you're looking at, they're starting to really weigh under the pressure of the way in which humans are being in this world. So it's a key priority. Earth care is so much at the core of what permaculture is all about. And that part of it too is about rehydrating the landscape. So we've taken off so much water for industrial agriculture, and we're just allowing it to, because of the way that we've cleared so many forests as well, that the water is just racing through and not actually soaking into the landscape. So we're having increasing desertification, we're getting massive amounts of erosion. The forests have been cleared, and so we don't have the same level of humidity and coolness in the landscape. And so everything is changing. We need to bring the water back into the land in a way that enables the regeneration of these ecosystems to happen, and the rehydration is really at the core of that. And we can do that at whatever scale we are, from our backyards in an urban environment to a farm scale, and even beyond, looking at how we design entire settlements that are able to actually replenish and recharge the water table, and to support the thriving of life because the water is being stored in the soil. And so all of this too is about how we can stabilize the climate. Permaculture is climate action. It is about looking at how we can be drawing down carbon, how we can create environments which have a natural stability. So this is kind of the permanence in the permaculture. It's looking about how we can sustain life over a long period of time. And I know that there's been lots of conversations lately around whether to use the word sustainable or whether to use the word regenerative. And I think, as Fritjof Capra was talking to us not that long ago, he was doing an interview with the Perma Youth, and they were talking about this very point. And he was suggesting that actually we need both words. Let's not throw out the sustainable word, because we do definitely need to be doing regeneration at the moment to repair the damage that's been done. But our goal needs to be working towards, in the long run, that we are creating sustainable societies that can continue on. And so through our work in ecosystems regeneration, landscape rehydration, habitat protection, all of these things are contributing to the stabilisation, the long-term stabilisation of our climate. And we've got a huge task to do in this. And our essential goal really is to look at how we can create one planet living. So at the moment, I think, if you've listened to any of my previous masterclasses, I've talked a lot about how, the ecological footprint studies show how, in order to actually meet humanity's needs and to absorb humanity's wastes, we collectively need 1.7 Earths. We only have one. And it's even worse if you take a look at what happens particularly in Western countries like Australia and the United States and even the UK. We need multiple planets in order to meet the kind of consumption and waste patterns that we have in our society. So really, earth care is very much tied to looking at how we can reduce consumption patterns, meet our needs in a way that they come from local resources, from renewable energy systems, about building our houses from natural materials, about growing and supplying the materials we need, and recycling things, and thinking about the clothes that we're wearing, and all of the things that we do on a daily basis, from our transportation systems, our energy systems, our food systems, our housing system, all of these things. What are the ways that we can be focusing on how we can be caring for the earth through each of those things? It's about creating a whole systems approach to living a one planet life. So that's kind of really the core of what earth care is about. I just wanted to share with you a couple of little pictures of the place where I live. Now, this is Crystal Waters, and probably about 30 years ago, this was just completely cleared, eroded landscapes, compacted, overstocked. And so what's happened over the last 30 years, by removing hard-hoofed animals, except for small herds that have been moved around, by reducing the slashing, by rehydrating the landscape, by allowing the natural regeneration of forests, and actually doing replanting of rainforest gullies, the whole landscape has started to come alive with so many different species of birds and frogs, and there's kangaroos and wallabies and echidnas. We have platypus in the creek. It's just absolutely incredible. We get migratory birds coming through to the various ponds. And what I noticed too, because the hills are still covered in trees in the distance, I actually get to watch as the clouds rise up in the morning. They sort of have settled down in the fields and down in the riverside at night, and then as the day awakens and the land starts to warm up, the clouds start to rise up these hills, and then I see them sort of form as this little band along the top, and then pop, off they go. It's kind of like the birth of clouds, and I watch this every day, or most days anyway, and then I go further along, closer towards the city, where a lot of these trees along the hillsides have been cleared, and the river vegetation is not there, so that moisture's not forming. It's just getting evaporated straight up really quickly, and you just don't see this kind of local water cycle. And so by the regeneration of the hillsides, and the regeneration of the riparian zones, and and just simply the rehydration of the landscape, we start to get this different ecological cycle happening. The important thing about this place too is that it was a really degraded piece of land. And so the idea of actually going and living a permaculture way of life doesn't mean going into the forest and cutting out a section and clearing the natural forest to actually create your own place. The imperative from the permaculture ethics is really about saying, okay, well, let's take the degraded land. Let's take the land that has been eroded or destroyed or impacted by human activity, and actually bring it back to life again. And I've watched over the last few decades of how quickly actually we can turn things around. And the rehydration, as I've talked many times already, is so important. So how can we slow and spread and sink and store water as much as we can in the landscape? I mean, one of the amazing things about living here again at this eco-village is that much of the water that falls on this landscape is slowed down, and it gets to sink down. There's new springs that have formed. There's 17 lakes that have been established throughout the gardens. Excuse me. People have swales and ways and terracing to slow the water down. So there's an incredible amount of growth. When I first came to the eco-village, there wasn't much happening on the slopes. And now we can see this, there's regeneration areas, there's orchards, there's gardens, there's so much more life. that's happening because of this rehydration. And plus, it makes a far better place for us to be. So it's earth care and it's people care at the same time. And particularly too, it's thinking about how we can be supporting the creating of habitats for other species, because these lakes become places, as I said, for migratory birds. I watch as the kangaroos and the wallabies come down to the edge of the lake. It's just an incredible place of life. I swim around this lake quite often, and as I'm sort of just gently swimming around, I can just see like all these dragonflies having this party kind of just above the level of the water, and it's so beautiful and full of life. Now, the other thing about the garden side of a permaculture approach is that it too is working to build in the care of the soil, the care of the ecosystem within the garden. So it starts to get a life of itself, life of its own, that it has, habitat for birds and lizards and frogs and all kinds of species, and that there's multiple layers and dimensions that are part of this. And there's bush tucker plants interwoven with perennial plants. And all of this together is designed in a way that it helps to rehydrate the landscape, through things like terracing and swaling, and the picking of appropriate species that fit within that particular environment. So this permaculture ethic of earth care goes from how we make decisions about, as I said before, our transport choices, to thinking about how we design and develop our gardens. So the best thing too about having your own local garden that surrounds your home is that you're not having to rely so much on the industrial food system, if at all, which means that you can actually really diminish your ecological footprint and not be contributing so much to the ongoing clearing of native forest still, which means we're actually helping to protect the natural areas. We're also not as reliant on the transportation of food around the world. So a local food garden is actually a huge part of earth care. If we can grow as much as we possibly can in the smallest space possible, in these really diverse, multi-layered gardens. So this is my vegetable garden basically. It's got herbs and flowers, edible flowers and fruits and vegetables and vines, native plants, all mixed in together in a way that means that in this small space I can get herbs and spices and proteins and fruits and carbohydrates, a whole range of different foods, just right outside my doorstep. And it doesn't take a huge amount of space. So let's take a look now at people care. So this is the second ethic of permaculture: earth care, people care. So people care relates to, of course, the many dimensions of how we exist together as families, as communities, in workplaces, and also our global relationships. And also, of course, very much about how we care for ourselves. So it's looking at health and well-being. It's also looking at the possibilities of the impacts that our way of life might be having on cultures and others. So it's focused on, first of all, too, creating healthy human habitats. So at the core of permaculture design is this goal to create and design habitats which are healthy for people, that provides as much of our needs as locally as possible in an integrated, regenerative way. That means we don't need to be extracting resources from far away in order to meet these basic needs. So as much as possible, we meet our needs in these local, healthy human habitats, which create opportunities for community and for a thriving life for your household and also a healthy life for you. And at the same time, be reaching out across the world to connect with other people and to be supporting others in our actions. So, as you can probably hear here now, it's about the questioning. It's not a set of rules about you must do this or you must do that, or you get judged for this or judged for that. No, it's really simply about us taking our own inner voice that does this check. Is my project caring for people? Is my project caring for the planet? Is my work plan, or is my, the way I'm choosing to feed myself and my family, or is the way that I'm selecting my clothes or my transport options contributing to the care of people and to care of the planet? And so it's really about creating these local healthy human habitats and resilient communities. And so what are the things that we can do to build resilience in our communities? Maybe it's supporting local work, or choosing to support the local carpenter as opposed to buying things that are made in factories overseas. It's about supporting the local businesses up and down your street. It's about supporting people who are in need. And we've seen this really strengthen so much during COVID about people reaching out and supporting one another. So there's lots of different ways that this can happen, and there's so many different ways that we're seeing it manifest. But I think at the core of permaculture, as I said before, was earth care. But unless we're caring for people as well, unless people feel supported, unless people feel like they have the resilience in themselves, and they feel loved and accepted and part of something larger than themselves, then we often we find that earth care doesn't happen. And so we need to come back to this point about addressing, even in the communities we work with in refugee settlements, if you're not addressing things like poverty and hunger and basic sanitation needs and access to water and opportunities for livelihood and meaningful work, then it's a real huge challenge to even get to the point of start thinking about earth care. Although we know that these things are completely intertwined, and that unless we're caring for the earth, there's far less possibilities for us to actually address these things. So they've got to be addressed together, which is why we talk about earth care and people care almost in the one breath. But you can kind of see if we just focus on earth care, we're kind of missing the point. Or if we're just focusing on people care, we're also missing the point too. So I really love that permaculture provides this, it sort of steps back further and looks at those three things together: earth care, people care, and fair share. So we're going to get to fair share in a minute. So in order to describe what this actually looks like, so earth care and people care together, I want to show this example of village homes in Davis, California. So it's actually a suburb, but it's a suburb that's been designed completely differently, with these kind of ethics at the heart. So village homes has been designed in a way that cars don't come into the middle of the village. It's a normal suburban area, but it's been flipped. So the cars stay on the outside. So you can drive up to the back of your home in little cul-de-sacs, but then the rest of it's mostly put to common land and walkways and cycleways. So here, along this main avenue, you can see beside, on the right-hand side, there's avenues of community gardens. So as you're walking your way from your home into the community centre or to the bus stop to go into the town, or, there's a little other shared meeting areas and cafes. So you walk past all this amazing food production. On the right-hand side, you can start to see some of the food forest areas. And this particular suburb has actually got almonds growing as its street trees, and they produce, over 7 tons of almonds every year, which means that they're able to use that money to actually go back into the landscape management. So this is a beautiful place in which people can live and they feel safe, and the trees help to create a nicer, cooler environment. This is kind of like desert land around outside. If you go out beyond this area, you'll see what a difference it makes. So they've soaked all the water back into the landscape through these large swale systems that are, suburb-size swale systems. So they're collecting all the water and even collecting water from the nearby neighbourhoods and bringing it into this landscape too. And also having these kind of trees around the houses, they've noticed that it's actually dropped the temperature inside, so they don't need as much cooling during the summertime. It's made it far more comfortable. And also, there's so much food here. 40% of the landscape is actually being put to common land where they have these orchards and vineyards and food gardens. So ecologically speaking, it's so much more beneficial. And for the people who are living there too, there's a collective purpose that happens within this. So rather than just being a place where you drive in and drive out and really don't have a relationship with either the place or the community, this does both and helps to regenerate the water cycle, provide opportunities for habitat and also diminish the ecological footprint of the people who are living in here simply by the way that it's designed. And then also people care relates to how we care for our personal health and well-being. So I work with these women here. This is Jennifer's in the green dress and this is Caroline in the blue and pink dress. And these women came to a permaculture design course that I was involved in Uganda that was led by a local Ugandan and Kenyan and Liberian teachers. And Jennifer works with girls at school and she does something, her own kind of version of something called Days for Girls. And she's actually more recently linked up with them. So she makes washable sanitary pads for girls at schools because she's recognised that actually this is something that keeps lack of access to pads prevents girls from going to school for several days every month. And I've just recently received some videos from her talking about how the girls were talking about, well, they have to actually drop out of school for a while, go out and work, so then they can get some pads. So then they can go back to school, because without the pads, they're not allowed to go to school. So these washable pads are actually something that means that if they get gifted these pad kits, then they don't have to keep buying them, and they're not creating waste. So through this caring for people, it's also creating an environmental benefit and a social benefit simultaneously. Now, the other thing that Jennifer and Caroline are doing is that as they're teaching the girls about their personal health and well-being and distributing these kits, they're also introducing concepts around health and nutrition and local food growing so that there's more diversity rather than just the corn and the beans, actually having home gardens. And so they're going around distributing seeds and helping them to set up their own school gardens and also home gardens as well. So this project, though, began with caring for the well-being of young girls, and particularly where she is, because she'd noticed that the most important thing about keeping, well, not the most important, but a significantly important thing about keeping girls in schools was preventing them from actually becoming teenage mothers. The longer they stayed in school, the more chance they had to finish their education and actually to move forward in their lives and to follow their dreams. So fair share. Other ways that you might have seen fair share in, it's kind of, interestingly, it's been something that hasn't been really well understood in permaculture. Some other ways you may have seen it written are fair shares or future care. I know Bill Mollison talked about it in his original writings around setting limits to population and consumption. And I recently heard another teacher talking about it as being return of surplus. So, but the way that we've seen it in most of the literature and most of the explanations we see is fair share. And it really helps to make it stick. It's a really easy way to remember So it's earth care, people care, and fair share. So what is it all about? Well, one of the first things that I often help to describe fair share is about asking, what is enough? So when we're thinking about what we actually need, if we think back to the conversation I was having before around looking at our ecological footprint, we actually consume way more than we actually need. We consume way more than the earth can support. So what is enough, and how can we think about diminishing our ecological footprint on the landscape, but also our footprint on other people's lives and other communities' potential for accessing the resources that they need, or other species' potential for accessing the resources they need. So we do need to shift our consumption patterns, and it's kind of one of those taboo topics. We're encouraged to consume because it feeds economic growth, and we get stimulus packages and extra money during lockdown to keep us spending. But what are we spending it on, and what is that money that we're spending doing in the world? And it's also thinking too, I would say, about what is the money that we're not seeing every day. What is your superannuation investing in? What are your banks investing in? Do you know? Have you asked? Have you chosen to put it into ethical investments? So it's what we consume and what our money is doing when we're not watching. And we need to face up to the excess. We often think, well, I've worked hard. I deserve this, or I deserve that. But, maybe step back and think, well, actually, do I need this, or do I need that? Possibly not. And, really face up to that possibility that we do really need to make significant changes in our consumption patterns, and to really get rid of so much of the excess that's there. It's not about living with hair shirts or getting rid of this abundance thinking. We actually want more abundance thinking, but we want to get rid of the excess and the high consumption of the damaging aspects of our society. So how can we do all this and having the smallest possible footprint? So that's that what is enough. How can we diminish our footprint and live as much from the local resources, from our local energy, from our local clothes, or traded clothes, traded resources, asking what's enough, reducing our consumption patterns and facing up to the excess. We can condense our footprint. So what is the smallest possible footprint that we can have? Let's set that as our goal. And it's not to live with hair shirts and to really just go without. Talking about how can we create local abundance in a way that is supporting regenerative practices. And a key part of thinking about fair share is, as I mentioned before, it's about what are the possibilities by us living a more low impact life that gives a possibility for other species to thrive and for other people to thrive in other places, and future generations too, when we continue to consume at the rate that we are and upsetting the balance of the climate, upsetting the balance of ecosystems, and contributing to the mass species, the 6th mass extinction event that we're currently in. This is where we are in a dire situation. And we need to take this quite seriously. I often don't talk about this as much because I don't want to feel like a doom and gloom person. I also don't want to sound like I want to scare you. But I also do want us to face up to the facts that we are in probably one of the most challenging times humanity has ever faced. And it's not just up to us as individuals, it's up to governments, it's up to business, it's up to industry, but it's also up to us as well, that each and every one of us, with the decisions and the choices that we make framed upon things like the permaculture ethics, where we have and we set as the intent and as the goals and speak forward these kind of ethics, that this is what we're calling for, this is what we're calling for government to do, this is what we're calling for business to do. If we kind of take this on and then radiate out these ideas into the world in whichever way we can, there will be more possibilities for other species to thrive and other peoples to thrive and future generations to thrive, as well as us too. So that's the people care, the earth care, with the concept of fair share for others woven through that too. And so it is about abundance thinking. You know, you saw the picture of my garden. In that garden, there is so much food. By thinking about how we can actually do the earth care work, that we can actually build in so much abundance in terms of food, in terms of community relationships. The more relationships that you build and the more connections that you make and the more diversity that you weave into the system, the more possibilities there are. And so coming from that perspective of, it's not just that there's a pie and that we can chop it up into a certain amount of pieces, and that perhaps we could just chop up the pie a little bit more evenly and share it out that way. I think that's a really a misunderstood way of thinking about fair share. The key part of thinking about fair share is that we want to create more abundance so that we can all thrive, and that through the regeneration of our water systems, of our soil systems, of our food systems, of the habitats, of our social systems, of collaboration and mutual aid, that we can start to build in more of those possibilities. And it also is supported by a focus on the gift economy, that often a lot of these things that we'd like to create don't exist in the the money exchange economy. So much of it happens, and so much of the abundance and the repair and the restoration and the regeneration work happens by us just getting out and going and doing it, sharing something with someone else, and then the gift comes back again. And so stepping out of always needing necessarily to valuing it from a monetary perspective. The little phrase that people always say was like, well, the bottom line is, the bottom line is not an economic line. The bottom line is our planetary survival, and also that we thrive together, and we thrive together in a way that lifts all life. So not just thinking about humans and not just thinking about money, because that's just sending us down a tunnel that has contributed to the challenges that we're facing right now. So lifting ourselves out of that, stepping into a space where we can actually acknowledge and be present and engage in an exchange of energy, of ideas, of support for one another. And that what I find actually by entering into this gift economy is that it reduces the amount of time that we need actually to go to work, because a whole lot of stuff that we need is just coming from either our gardens or from within our community, and the need for money is diminishing. So and then by having that more of the opportunity to be more community based or home based, and we get to know our place more, we get to spend more time with family or friends, or doing things that really nourish our souls. So all of these things intertwined start to create a new story, a new narrative about what it means to be successful. What is progress and growth and wealth? What are all these things from an ecological perspective? So there's, things do grow. It's not saying that we can't have growth. I mean, we want our plants to grow. We want our communities to grow in their richness of their relationships. We want our love to grow. So, but it's redefining that. And what is wealth? Where does wealth come from? Is it from having a stash of money in a bank or having a whole lot of stuff? Or is it coming, again, from that richness of relationships and knowing that we are supported and we have things that we need to not just to survive, but to thrive and to have the flexibility and the possibilities there for us to imagine a different future. And so these are all the kind of things that I see as are really central to being part of that fair share. It's stepping out of being in the consumer culture. It's stepping out of the sort of the waste in our society and finding ways to, as they've defined in the earlier books in permaculture, it's that return of surplus. But I want to also challenge that too. It's not thinking if you just talk about the return of surplus, then it means you've actually had to kind of consume it first to then return surplus somewhere else, and you're kind of giving away the excess. Whereas actually, maybe we can just not create so much in the first instance or use so much in the first instance. And so we don't have, we're not creating the waste. But what we are doing is creating new possibilities. So fair share, I think, is also about focusing on the social justice and the ecological justice, the intergenerational justice, the rights of nature, but also the decolonizing of our mindscapes. And as Vandana Shiva says, we need to move away from the monocultures of our mind as much as we do the monocultures in agriculture. We also need to be thinking about how we can step away from these sort of colonial practices and how that shaped how we see ourselves in relationship to the landscape and to the people around us and to Indigenous cultures and First Nations people everywhere. And so also from that abundance thinking too, Vandana Shiva also talked about, the beauty of the seed is that out of one you can get millions, and that's an economics of abundance. And so when we talk about economics from a fair share perspective, it is from that abundance perspective. It is from that idea that it's not, if we need to plant something, we'll go to the store and we'll buy the seeds and we'll buy the packets of fertilizer. But when you need to plant something, you have a community seed bank or your own seed bank at home, or your garden is your seed bank. And you plant some and then you leave some to go to seed, and you get so many surplus that you can give away some, or you can trade them for something else for, a farmer up the road. And that through this it's not actually drawing down on your resources, it's actually building up and it's uplifting your community. And so I love this thinking like this in a way that we can apply it to so many different aspects of our life. And as I said too, it's about thinking how our landscapes and our gardens can be supporting other species. This is one of the amazing birds that now comes and visits me every year. This is the female Kuel, and I hear them just as it's starting to enter into the warm season. They've got this very distinctive call, and so there's the males are completely black and the females are more speckled like this, and I imagine that so they can kind of hide in the nest while they're nesting and feel safe, that they're kind of hidden. But what I love is that, there's a few particular trees in my garden that are one of the homes for these birds, and they come back every single year. And in my garden I find frogs and lizards, and I design my garden as much as I possibly can to encourage as much wildlife. So having water, having lots of different sort of logs and mulch and spaces that provide protection, and even protection for little birds. So often I find that if I have lots of little shrubs all through the garden, it encourages the little insectivorous birds to come. So all these little native birds are darting around the garden, doing a magnificent job of pecking off all these different pests. So it's this wonderful habitat for them. And they're doing this brilliant job supporting me to grow food. So it becomes this partnership, this beautiful relationship that happens between the wild species in the garden and me. And so we're all in it together. It's not me against nature and trying to grow food in a kind of a war against nature to try and stop the weeds and stop the pests and fight this and fight that. It's building up a collaborative approach to how we can all be working together so that, the little birds are getting what they need. They're getting the food that they need, and they're having the protection from the, they don't feel so vulnerable from the species above. So I'm always trying to think about, well, how can I design in more potential for other species to make this their home as well? And in that way, it just becomes easier every year. So in summary, if you look at this example here, you can see all the ethics intertwined. So by caring for the soil and the ecosystems and creating habitat, I'm inviting other species into this place. The way that these species interact and this garden is working in a really low maintenance way is supporting me as the gardener, and my family, enabling us to get wonderful food, but also this beautiful environment and habitat for us to live in. And also from a fair share perspective, I'm able to actually think about how I'm able to provide opportunities and possibilities through the way in which we're gardening for many different species to coexist here, and for my garden to be producing so much abundance that I can give it away. I have probably given away tens of thousands of cuttings out of this garden to people to help them get gardens happening. So, they come in and get a snip of this and a snip of that, or I go and do a workshop somewhere and I take bundle loads of plants to help people, to get their gardens happening wherever they are. And so the Earth Care People Care Fair Share can be woven in, and you can describe what you're doing through this frame of reference, and it's this language. And I encourage you to think about, well, how is it that I'm applying Earth Care, People Care and Fair Share into what I do? So another example of how all these things are intertwined is the work that we're doing currently with people like Sakina. This is Sakina. She lives in Kakuma refugee settlement in Kenya. She's been living there for about 11 or 12 years now. And Sakina and I have started working together, and one of her key goals is to teach young people how to grow food in a permaculture way so that it's helping to replenish their landscape and their soils and improve the habitat for their community in terms of it being cleaner, cooler, having fresher water, better food. So it's healthier for them. It's addressing issues of hunger and nutritional density of food, which is helping to increase their capacity to deal with various diseases and problems that they face there in the refugee settlement. And at the same time, these projects that they're creating, what we're working on right now is to create a revolving loan fund, so that once they've done the training with Sakina, that at the end of the program, these perma-youth, they're sort of 16 to 18-year-olds, actually get a small fund as a collaborative group to come up with programs that can help them to create a right livelihood. So there's groups there that are starting to talk about creating like little mushroom enterprises or chicken enterprises or seedling enterprises, and all of these enterprises together create a kind of an ecology of enterprises too. So you can kind of see here too that really the whole program that we've been talking about together has woven through it the ethics of permaculture. And so as Sakina's teaching too, she's teaching these young people about the ethics of permaculture, and that's what's being embedded into their programs, and they're going to go out and teach other people. And so it just keeps getting handed from one person to the next, and each person who takes it on puts a different kind of frame on it or explains it slightly differently. But as I said right at the start, the language stays the same, but the way it is applied is completely different. another example of ways to integrate all of the different ethics together. This is a city farm in Brisbane that I was involved in starting in the 1990s. It's called Northeast Street City Farm. And this is one of the Introduction to Permaculture programs that I ran there a few years ago. So Northeast Street City Farm reflects all of the ethics. So let me just unpack that a little bit. So this was a degraded piece of land on the edge of a quite degraded creek. And 25 years ago, a group of us got together and started to care for this piece of land, to plant natives and bush tucker plants, to regenerate the soil and get gardens growing and plant fruit trees. And so the whole place started to come alive, and we started even to notice some migratory species coming along. We also started to do tree planting along the creek side, so starting to restore the natural vegetation along the edge and protect the mangroves that were starting to re-emerge, and reintroduce species that had been cleared 100 years ago. So we did a lot of research about that too. So from an ecological perspective, so much is happening in that space. And then from a people care perspective, this is a place that's open. Anyone can come in and use it at any time, and thousands of people come through this place every week, from doing workshops to play groups, yoga groups, farmers markets, music events, all different kinds of things happen in this space. And it's about people caring for people and community, creating community. So it's all about people caring for people. And it's so brilliant what has come out of this, and the stories that have been told, and the impact that it's had on people's lives, and the choices and decisions that they make, and how they can come down here and connect and find other people who are also interested in living a more sustainable way. So just simply by starting to redesign and rethink what this piece of common land is about, it's kind of a recommoning of public space from what was just a piece of wasteland into this vibrant hub that supports community. And so from a fair share perspective, this is a really interesting project too. So, a lot of people were saying it's too expensive to go and buy organic produce. We simply can't afford it. Whereas here, you can come down and get involved in the community garden, and whether you're able to garden or not, or you can just come down and help make cups of teas for people, or maybe run a class, or do the yoga session, whatever it might be, if you get involved and you get engaged, then you are part of the people who get to harvest the food and take it home. And then also there's links now as well with local farmers who come in for the farmers market. And by having this closer relationship between the urban and the rural communities, without all the middlemen that are involved in the normal food system, you actually get much higher quality, more nutrient dense, local, freshly harvested food at a cheaper price. And so this idea about building relationships, closer relationships, helps to diminish the ecological footprint of the food. It creates support for the farmers, as well as providing greater access to better food for people who normally wouldn't have been able to afford it. So what I love about this project, this city farm, is that the ethics are just so well embedded, and you can describe them from so many different perspectives. Now, another project that I wanted to talk about that looks at all these different ethics embedded is the Permayouth. So Permayouth is a group of young people who are focused on exploring permaculture together, and really inspired by the Greta movement, I suppose, the climate activism movement. And we're saying, well, so we go out and rally, and then what next? What do we do today or tomorrow or the next day? And they wanted to create this everyday activism. And that's permaculture, essentially, like how you live your life every day, that it's actually contributing to the repair of planetary systems and educating other people about how to do that too. So that's what Permayouth's all about. And so Permayouth, through young people connecting with each other, locally and globally. We now have perma-youth networks in Australia, in Asia, in the Americas, in Africa, and just starting to form in Europe as well. So this is a movement that is starting to just absolutely flourish, and it's about cross-cultural communications, it's about intergenerational communications, and it's all through the gift economy, and it's through the partnership of different organizations supporting and mentors coming in and sharing their story, and young people making music. So the man in the middle, young man there, Somali, he writes music, and so his group from the refugee settlement write music about permaculture. Maya here, she hosts the event. There's another young girl who writes slam poetry and really dives deep into the ethics of everything that's going on. Other young people do photography and artwork and garden tours and presentations about animal husbandry. And then guests come in and talk about their expertise and how they've woven permaculture into their life. So I really see that this approach embeds all of the key things about the ethics. So it's about how we can work together to care for the earth. It's how we can support each other globally to do that. It's about supporting each other in this process, and that we can help to build mental health and physical well-being and address hunger and poverty all through the conversations. So it's creating possibilities for greater connection, which then leads to positive change. And then through Fair Share, because it is essentially about making sure that all people have access to this. So it's free and it's available online as long as you can access. I mean, I guess that's the only thing that's a limitation, is having access to the internet. But through the fundraising that the Global Perma-Youth do, they then send money to people like Somali to actually get data packages so that they can come in and access these resources. So, it's really trying to look at how everyone is starting to support each other and to support the flourishing of local communities everywhere. Now, another way of looking at how to apply all of the different permaculture ethics is this wonderful system or diagram or way of thinking presented by Kate Rayworth called donut economics. So let me just explain a little bit about what donut economics is about in case this is the first time that you've seen it. So Kate Rayworth is from Oxford University, and she's written a book actually called Donut Economics, and she has even something now called the Donut Economics Action Lab, and there's even groups starting in various places. There's one that's forming in Melbourne through a group called Regenerative Melbourne, which just started working with too. So the donut economics is different from this sort of economic growth model. It's looking at, well, what is the economics that supports the well-being of people and the planet? So donut economics is a really great way to explain how we can create an economic system that supports earth care, people care, and fair share. So it's looking at, well, what we don't want massive continual economic growth. Because if we overshoot, if we keep growing and growing and growing, what we're doing is what we're seeing now. We're creating climate change and ocean acidification, pollution, and we're extracting water from the landscape, and we're transforming land from being forests into fields, and we're losing biodiversity and so many ecological footprint impacts. When we overshoot too far, that means that the human footprint on the planet is getting so much so that it's actually undermining the capability of the earth to support life, or humanity at least anyway. And if the economic system is too small and they're squeezing it, you end up squeezing the possibilities for humanity to thrive. There's not enough access to food or healthcare or good education or not enough work available, and as conflicts emerge because of all these shortfalls and lack of access to energy, or being able to communicate or speak up, or have gender equity, social equity, maybe lack of access to suitable housing or toilets even. So if the economic system is too low, that's what happens. It squeezes the social fabric. If it's too high, then it actually squeezes the ecological capacity. So there's this sweet spot, the donut in the middle, which is where we wanted to aim for. And so I think this is a wonderful type of economics which supports the permaculture ethics of earth care, people care, and fair share. So earth care, people care, and fair share, these are the core ethics that are these intertwined faces of what permaculture really is all about, in terms of a way of thinking and being in the world, and the way of stepping back and taking that bigger picture perspective, so that before we start anything, whether it be a backyard garden, or whether it's an eco-village project, or a new project to start a new enterprise, that actually looking through and asking ourselves these questions about, is what I'm doing contributing to the care of the earth? Is what I'm doing contributing to the care of people? And is this actually contributing to the possibilities that other species, other people, and future generations will also have the opportunities to be able to do this too? So I hope this has given you a little bit more of an idea about how we can apply the permaculture ethics and really use them in our everyday life and as a guide for all of our decisions. So some of the things that might support you in getting the information to actually live a more permaculture life, I put together a blog. So there's at least 400 different articles that are available in this blog, Our Permaculture Life, and you can see there ourpermaculturelife.com. You can subscribe there. I put out a monthly newsletter and some brief weekly updates of latest news and things. So that's the blog, and you'll find out there all information about any new films that are coming up, or any new events that we're running, any updates. So all the free stuff you can find in here. And also these monthly masterclasses. So I wonder whether you've actually signed up as a regular masterclass attendee, or you just join up when you see it come through. So I'm running these every month, and so this is the 31st. Actually, the 30th was meant to be just before Christmas, and it ended up being just a one for a local community in Brisbane. So I'm going to see if I can get that up online as well for you. But the rest are all available through my YouTube channel. And I've done all sorts of ones, from looking at the response to the bushfires to how does permaculture relate to the SDGs, for example, or what are the lessons from living in eco-villages for permaculture, and in the midst of COVID, what was happening with the kitchen garden revolution that was taking off. So check out all of those on the YouTube channel, which is Our Permaculture Life. And also I've just started last year creating a new podcast. So this comes out every week. And also on the YouTube channel, I meant to mention before in the last slide, as well as the masterclasses, you'll find lots of little videos about plants, and also my video about no-dig gardening. Lots of materials there on the YouTube channel. So the weekly podcast is where I get to have fun having really interesting conversations with colleagues and friends and people that challenge and inspire me. So lots of wonderful people like Rosemary Morrow, who's an elder in the permaculture movement, who just received an Order of Australia medal for her contribution to permaculture, to the wonderful founder of 1 Million Women, and David Holmgren, and Daniel Christian Wall, Fritjof Capra, the eminent systems thinking scientist, to the permaculture author Linda Woodrow, and the founder of the Transition Town movement, Rob Hopkins, and my wonderful friend Mariam Issa, who was a refugee from Somalia 20 years ago, but has now been living in Melbourne, and the work that she's doing with women through storytelling, and the amazing young activist Sierra Robinson, who works with Earth Guardians. She's based out in Canada. So anyway, every week there's a new conversation, and I hope you subscribe and come and join me both on audio and video with that. So my main passion is around teaching permaculture teachers. All of these aspects of the permaculture ethics, I think, are so essential for us to move forward as humanity towards a positive future. And so I see one of the best ways of doing that is teaching people who have the capacity to teach other people who have the capacity to teach other people. And I think this myceliating network of teachers around the world are such an enormous resource in bringing forth like the new narrative that we need in the world right now. So I run something called the Permaculture Educators Program, and it's a combined online permaculture design certificate and permaculture teacher certificate course. So if you'd like to find out more about that, you can see the website there, permacultureeducationinstitute.org, or you can email me at morag@permacultureeducationinstitute.org. We have members part of this program from 6 continents. It's a flexible online program, so you can start anytime you want and take as long as you need. There's no deadlines and no expiry date, and we have regular weekly sessions of all different kinds, from film clubs to design studios to education labs to community hubs, all different kind of things going on all the time that are optional on top of the course materials that you get. So I welcome you to check it out or to ask me for more information, and I'd love, if you're interested, to actually come and be a permaculture teacher too. So thank you so much for being here today and to be part of this session. These sessions, I decide on a topic based on questions that I've been getting and comments that I've heard, and suggestions for different topics as well. So if you've got any ideas, feel free to send them through to me. And as I said at the start, this program is sponsored by the Permaculture Education Institute, Our Permaculture Life, Ethos Foundation, and the Perma-Youth. So I'm not sure if you noticed when I was talking about Perma-Youth, but that was actually a date coming up on this weekend, actually, when the Perma-Youth are going to be talking with the founder of the Permaculture magazine and also a social permaculture expert and author, educator, Luby McNamara. So check that out if you go to permayouth.org. And also, if you'd like to support the work that we're doing with the refugee Perma-Youth and also the women's groups, we warmly welcome you to donate at ethosfoundation.org.au. I send 100% of any donations straight through to those projects. Don't forget to check out all the other resources that are available through Our Permaculture Life. And I don't think I said the name of the podcast, which is Sense Making in a Changing World. And you can find that both on the podcast version and also as a YouTube, brand new YouTube. So go across and subscribe to Sense Making in a Changing World YouTube, and you'll get weekly new interviews that you can dive into there. So thanks so much for being here today. It's been a real pleasure to have your company. We had thousands of people registered for this session, and it's an absolute delight to see such interest in permaculture. It really warms my heart that there is so much focus on this kind of thinking and action in the world now. So thanks everyone for being here. It's been a real delight to have your company. Feel free to stick around now and stay in the chat. I'll be here for about 15 minutes more, and I'd love to answer any questions or have a conversation about any of the different permaculture ethic ideas. And also make sure you pop in the chat to any ideas that you have for future topics that you'd like. All right, I'll see you in the chat. Take care, everyone. Bye.